data-driven companies, Yammer and Facebook. And I'm here to talk to you today about some lessons I learned at those companies. So first I want to talk a little bit about what it means to be data-driven. There's a part of it that seems obvious, which is that everyone in your organization is using data as part of their daily workflow effectively. But the second part is something that a lot of people miss, right? And is that when it comes down to making decisions between data and your gut, you have to trust the data. You have to go with the data. Right? That's actually a very hard thing to achieve. And I would bet that a lot of you think of your organizations as data-driven, but I would venture a guess that probably none of you could say that at your entire company, everyone would go with the data instead of their gut. So what I'm here to tell you about today is a few things that I learned, ways to help establish trust in data and in the programs and the people who are providing results from that data to create a more data-driven organization. So the things I want to talk to you about today are starting small, knowing your audience, not being a house, which I'll explain in detail later, and being transparent. So starting small, what do I mean? Well, if we met today, and we should, you should come introduce yourselves to me afterwards, and then I betrayed your trust later this week, that'd probably be a problem. You'd probably never trust me again. I wouldn't do that. But if we build up a rapport, and then, I let you down in some small way, a long way down the line, then it'd just be like, okay, these sorts of things happen. The same is true in organizations, right? Especially when you're working on new projects, whether they're data projects or any other sort of project. If you rack up a lot of small wins first, then it's okay if you have some misstep down the line. But to start reaching for the moon with really big ambitions, and I hear about this a lot, where people say we've got our multi-year big data initiative, we're reaching for the moon, we're going to do all these great things. Start small, rack up a few wins, and then you give yourself a lot of leeway when you think mistakes do happen in the future. So, as an example, a friend of mine is a marketing manager. I don't know if any of you have ever had to pull like a really complicated email list, but it's a thing that can be somewhat tricky to do. And the consequences for messing it up are big. You can't unsend email. It's very public, right? It goes out to people outside your organization. So, this particular guy, right when he started his job, he was responsible for pulling like the hairiest, craziest email list you could imagine of people who fulfilled like 10 different criteria within a certain time range, but weren't on a few different blacklists, and he screwed up. And he sent some emails to the wrong people. And then it happened again later, and he wasn't allowed to send email anymore. And then it happened to the person after him. And then they fired those people and got rid of the email vendor. It's pretty big consequences, right? Like you're losing a lot of time and money as a company when something like that happens. It could have been avoided if they had started small, worked out the kinks on some really simple email lists, and then moved on to do more complicated things in the future. My second piece of advice is about knowing your audience. So it's really important to think about who you're delivering your results to, or about who you're going to inform through data, because people have different ways of consuming things, and it's based partially on their personalities, but it's also based partially on their goals. So like think about executives, right? When I deliver data to executives, and I am an executive now, so I can corroborate this, but executives are mostly action-oriented. We want to know what to do, right? What is the data telling me? And it doesn't have to be the most precise thing in the world. It just has to have the right action item. It has to be clear that you've thought about what that should be. But in my previous jobs, I spent a lot of time working with engineers. And they wanted to know that I was doing my job right. They wanted to see statistical rigor, right? They want to see sample sizes and p-values. I would never get that question from an executive. So, in order for the engineers to trust that what I was saying was right, that I was giving them the right direction with this data, they had to see my work, right? An example of where this is implemented really well, I think, actually is Optimizely. So if you run an A/B test with Optimizely, you get a winner and a loser, or like it's not ready yet. But behind the scenes, there's all the statistical information, so if you're an economist or a statistician or an engineer, and you want to know whether Optimizely is running things up to your standards, you can just go check. You can see, right? You can get all the information that you want. There's a corollary to knowing your audience. It's also about how you relate with your audience. And I call it Don't Be a House. I'm not talking about the structure house, but actually just the TV Doctor House. Anyone watch that show? Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, House is a brilliant doctor, weekly diagnosis, really rare diseases in terminal patients, but his bedside manner is not very good. Right? Actually, it's terrible. He treats his patients poorly. The thing is that his patients have to trust him because he's the foremost expert in the world, right? They're going to die, and they need his help. And so he can be a jerk to these people, and they still listen to him. But that's not the case at all of your companies, I would think, right? The people you work with probably aren't going to die without your help. Probably not going to lose their jobs. And actually, they're probably very good at what they do, right? So, you know, your marketers, they're probably experts in marketing, right? The people who are responsible for data-driven sales initiatives, they're experts in sales. So to come in and say, hey, we've got this program that might make you better at this, or we've got some piece of data that says that you're not doing things quite as optimally as you should be, that's potentially adversarial. That can be scary for some people. And I think Ellie from Tableau said earlier today that any self-respecting professional would easily jump on the data-driven bandwagon if you showed them the right tools. I don't think that's quite true. You have to do it in the right way. You can't do it like House. You have to approach it with an attitude that you're on the same team, you're working for the same goals, and you're not here to make them look bad. My last point is about transparency. So I'll give you an example from my Yammer days. At Yammer, I worked on a lead scoring tool. Basically, Yammer, for those of you who don't know, is a social network similar to Facebook for people to communicate with their coworkers internally. There's a free version of the product, and then there's a paid set of admin tools. So what we would do is we would figure out who was really heavily using the free version of the product, surface those people to the sales team so that we could get them to upgrade to the admin tools. And we did this through a tool that had a lead score. Right? We spent a lot of time modeling this lead score, figuring out what sorts of behavioral elements made someone really likely to convert from the free product to the paid version of the product. Our sales team didn't use that. They looked at this tool, and then they spent a lot of time verifying the rankings on their own, spent a lot of time kind of jumping around on the list, not really just going down in the order that we thought made the most sense. So we looked into why. And it turned out that they just didn't understand how the rankings were being made, right? It was this like black box to them where data was going in, and then, you know, magic happened, and then out came some ranking. And so they didn't know like what they should say when they talked to these customers, right? But more importantly, they weren't sure how to evaluate whether it was right or not. To them, they knew all about their own sales prospecting processes, right? When I think about my own ability to solve a problem, like, I think I can solve problems okay, right? But more importantly, if I don't think I've solved the problem well enough, I can work harder on it. I can always work hard enough to feel like what I've done is better than something I have no idea about. And that's how these salespeople saw this. So what we ended up doing to make this tool more useful was just simply surfacing a hover alert. So if you hovered over a particular person or a company in this prospecting tool, you would see this person has really high engagement, right? Their network has been growing, there's really strong executive involvement, that sort of thing. And then the behavior that we saw was that people were actually using the tools as we had built them, right? They were going through and they quickly understood why leads were ranked the way they were ranked. And they didn't think, okay, I have to now go and do a bunch of research to corroborate these results. So, to recap, trust, really important in building a data-driven organization. You can help build trust by starting small, knowing your audience, not being a house, and being transparent. My name is Derek Steer, Mode Analytics. Thanks for your time.